A single insult, a dismissive smirk, and a woman he thought he could belittle. Moments later, she stepped into the room and revealed a truth that left every officer speechless. The afternoon sun pressed warmly against the crowded downtown sidewalks, casting long gold streaks across the steps of the city's main government building. Cars hummed, vendors shouted, and office workers rushed past yet in the middle of the noise stood Marcia Lewis, a black mother clutching a worn folder against her chest. Her fingers tightened around the edges of the papers inside, the faint tremble in her hands betraying the nerves she tried hard to hide. She drew a slow breath, steadying herself, her eyes scanning the tall glass doors as if rehearsing every step before entering. Sweat glimmered at her temple, though her posture remained composed, almost dignified. A few feet away, Officer Grant leaned against a stone pillar, watching her with narrowed eyes. His expression carried that familiar blend of impatience and suspicion reserved for people he believed didn't belong in places like this. He nudged his partner, smirking as Marcia hesitated near the entrance. As though her pause alone proved she was up to something, Marcia felt his gaze dig into her back, heavy and unwelcoming, but she didn't turn. Instead, she closed her eyes. For a heartbeat, whispering something only she could hear, part prayer, part reminder of why she had come. Then, with quiet determination, she stepped forward toward the doors. Marcia approached the officers with measured steps, her voice soft but steady. "Excuse me, officer. Could you point me to the Administrative Affairs office?" She offered a polite smile, the kind people use when they hope courtesy might soften a hard edge. Officer Grant barely glanced at her. Instead, he let out a breathy chuckle and nudged his partner. "Administrative Affairs? Sure, people like her are always getting lost in the wrong buildings." His partner smirked, and Grant added, loud enough for Marcia to hear, "Next thing you know, they'll be asking where the mayor's office is." Heat rushed to Marcia's cheeks. She felt the sting of humiliation rise like a lump in her throat, but she refused to let it settle. She straightened her back, a subtle, quiet act of defiance, and gave a small nod. "Thank you anyway," she murmured, even though he had offered her nothing as she walked away. A faint jingle escaped from her hand, a badge-shaped keychain clipped to her folder. Grant didn't notice, but a passerby did, their eyebrows lifting in recognition. Marcia's stride carried a confidence at odds with her simple blouse and slacks, an authority worn not on her clothes. But in the way she held her chin, the way she refused to fold, without another word, she pushed open the building's heavy doors. A sharp buzz from Officer Grant's radio cut through his lingering laughter. "Grant, report to conference room B mandatory meeting." He groaned dramatically, pushing himself off the pillar. "Great, another lecture about paperwork," he muttered. As he headed inside, he didn't notice Marcia entering through a side corridor. Walking with purpose, quiet, steady, unshaken upstairs, the atmosphere shifted. Conference room B hummed with unease. Several officers stood in stiff clusters, murmuring under their breath. Uniform collars were adjusted, boots straightened, postures lifted. Someone important was coming, someone whose presence could bend the air before they even walked in. Just outside the room, Marcia stood by a window, her voice low but firm as she spoke on the phone. "Yes, I'll address the department today," she said, eyes scanning the hallway thoughtfully. "They deserve honesty. All of them." Her words carried a weight that didn't match her simple attire. As Grant approached, he caught only the end of her sentence. He rolled his eyes immediately, scoffing under his breath. "Unbelievable. Always trying to stir something up," he grumbled. Completely convinced she was meddling in matters far above her reach, he stepped past her without a second glance, unaware that the woman he dismissed was walking toward the same room, toward the very meeting that had summoned him. Inside the conference room, the murmur of anxious voices faded the moment a senior deputy stepped forward. His expression was solemn, almost ceremonial. "Everyone," he called out, his voice echoing against the walls, "please rise for the incoming police commissioner." Chairs scraped back. Officers straightened their spines. Grant tugged at his uniform, smoothing the wrinkles he hadn't cared about just minutes before. He lifted his chin, trying to look composed, important, even though his pulse jumped with sudden nervousness. Then came the sound. Footsteps, measured, unhurried, confident. They drew closer, each step tightening the air inside the room. The door swung open, and in the doorway stood Marcia. For one suspended heartbeat, no one moved. Confusion rippled, first then realization, then outright shock. Grant's jaw loosened, and the color drained from his face as though someone had pulled it straight out of him. His breath hitched, disbelief twisting in his chest. Marcia stepped inside with an authority that wrapped around the room like quiet thunder. Her gaze was steady, calm, even compassionate, but undeniably commanding. A flicker of memory surfaced in Grant's mind, though he didn't yet understand it. Whispers in the station last week about a reform activist, known for bridging fractured communities, being selected as the new commissioner. Someone fearless. Someone respected. Someone unexpected. Now she stood before them, all dignified, composed, and very, very real. A tense silence filled the room as Marcia stepped to the front. Every officer braced for a reprimand, especially Grant, who tried to shrink behind the others despite standing stiffly at attention. But Marcia's expression softened, carrying none of the bitterness many expected. "I want to begin," she said, her voice warm yet steady, "by sharing something personal." She let her gaze drift across the room. "I've spent years being underestimated. People assuming I didn't belong in certain rooms, or that I'd lose my way before reaching them. But every slight, every dismissal taught me something invaluable about leadership, about patience, about purpose, about seeing people for who they can be, not who the world says they are." A few officers shifted awkwardly. Grant's throat tightened. Then Marcia turned toward him. Grant braced for impact. But instead, she said calmly, "Officer Grant, I'm appointing you as our new community trust liaison. You'll be working closely with me." A ripple of surprise shot through the room. Grant blinked. "Me? Why?" Marcia smiled gently. "Because 3 years ago, you were the officer who stayed late after a neighborhood incident, not because you had to, but because you wanted the kids there to feel safe. I remember that. I remember you." Grant's eyes widened. She knew. She had seen him, not the version he pretended to be today, but the one he once tried to become. And in that moment, shame, gratitude, and something like hope collided inside him. Grant stood frozen, the weight of Marcia's words sinking into him like cold water. Shame crawled up his spine, tightening his throat. He had mocked her, dismissed her, only to discover she had seen a part of him he'd long buried, a better part he hardly recognized anymore. Gratitude mixed with regret until his chest felt too full to contain either emotion. The room was utterly silent. Dozens of officers watched, waiting to see whether he would deny, deflect, or rise. Grant swallowed hard. His voice trembled as he stepped forward. "Commissioner Lewis, I owe you an apology." He didn't try to disguise the crack in his words. "For the way I spoke to you outside. For making assumptions. For forgetting what this job is supposed to mean." His gaze dropped, the bravado stripped away. "I'm truly sorry." Marcia regarded him for a long, thoughtful moment. Not with triumph. Not with anger. But with a quiet, steady understanding. "I accept your apology," she said softly. Then her tone strengthened, carrying through the room like a deliberate command. "But remember this, Officer Grant," she held his eyes. "Respect isn't a reaction, it's a duty." The words settled over the room, heavy and unforgettable. Grant nodded, humbled. And for the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of purpose return. As the meeting drew to a close, a quiet transformation settled over the room, something deeper than policy, deeper than protocol. Officers who had entered stiff and wary now watched Marcy with a new dawning respect. Not because she had asserted authority, but because she had chosen mercy over humiliation. Guidance over vengeance. Grant took his new assignment paperwork with both hands, still processing the shift inside him. The shame hadn't disappeared, but it had been reshaped into resolve, a determination to live up to the version of himself Marcy believed still existed. And in that, he realized the true weight of her leadership. She didn't aim to break him for his mistakes. She aimed to lift him out of them. The narrator's voice carries the lesson like a gentle echo. True leadership is not measured by how sharply power can strike, but by how deeply it can heal. Marcia had every reason to belittle the man who mocked her. Yet she chose instead to reveal the strength of seeing potential where others saw flaws. And so the message remains subtle but uncheckable. Never judge someone by assumptions. The person you look down on today may be the very person who inspires you tomorrow. As Grant watched Marcia leave the room, he understood that he had not just met his commissioner, he had met the leader who would change him.